are live in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Mayor Frey, thank you so much for joining our Save America movement live stream. We've got Steve Schmidt remotely here. This city has been through a lot, but it is being looked to now as an example for the rest of the country and some places across the world as the exemplar of how to resist. At one point, MPD had 619 officers squared off against 4,400 ICE agents deployed to this city. As much pride as you must take in being put on that pedestal as the example of resistance, there has to be a deep level of exhaustion that is setting in amongst the people of the city who have done so much to set that example.
Of course there is, and importantly, this is about something more powerful, more complex, and I think more significant than resistance. It's about love. Yeah. You know, it's about people showing up for their neighbors. It's about understanding that there is this common humanity that binds us, and it's also about standing up for our great nation, and that's exactly what you're doing with this movement to save America. It's recognizing that at the baseline, we're all human beings. We care deeply about our families. We care about our communities. And when you got somebody that comes in by the thousands, in this case between 3,000 and 4,000 agents that are trying to rip families apart, terrorize the people that are part of our daily lives, you stand up for your neighbors. And that's exactly what's happening. But to your point, yeah, people are tired. We are relieved that the ICE agents have substantially declined. We went from somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 agents as of a few weeks ago to somewhere in the hundreds. Yeah. We're getting a number of varying reports, but we're on the way.
This was not the first time that Minneapolis, that Minnesota held the line for democracy, really. And Steve, I want to bring you into the conversation because your historical perspective on this and what this city, this state has done for the nation historically is a really powerful testimony about what Minneapolitans and Minnesotans have dedicated to this country.
Well, the first Minnesota during the second day of the Battle of Gettysburg saved the country. The Confederacy was within 90 seconds of being able to win the battle, achieve its objective to put itself between the Union Army in Washington, D.C. and force a surrender. And to this day, the highest casualty action in the history of the U.S. military remains the sacrifice of the men of the 1st Minnesota who fixed bayonets in charge. 84% of them were wounded or killed in action, an incredible sacrifice. And the banner of that regimental flag still hangs in Minnesota along with the captured Confederate flags. And we should think about this in those terms, that it's an invasion by the federal government of an American city where the rights of American citizens was routinely infringed upon by the federal law enforcement agents who were masked, who indiscriminately pointed weapons and killed at least a couple of Minnesota residents, American citizens. And I guess, Mayor Frey, the question I'd like to ask you is that when you look ahead a couple years now into the future, you can look and you see Jamie Raskin sitting next to Jim Jordan in the hearings where Kristi Noem was facing and questioning. In a few months' time, Jamie Raskin's going to be sitting in that chairmanship chair. When you think about the pointing of weapons as a day-to-day, everyday occurrence by ICE agents at Americans, and we've all seen the film, the aggressiveness, the politicized rhetoric coming out of federal agents' mouth, loyalty to Trump, degradation of the former president, Joe Biden. How do you think about that misconduct that you've witnessed. What is your beginning, the foundation of how we need to think about it as a country to start reining that in so that never happens again? We never have the type of chaos unleashed by a federal agency of federal employees that work for the American people. Just outrageous misconduct. And I wonder how you see it ahead, some of the lessons that we're going to need to start dealing with to make sure it doesn't ever happen again.
Steve, I love the fact that you didn't just go back to the murder of George Floyd and the protests in the streets, but you went all the way back to the 1st Regiment in the Civil War. Obviously, Minneapolis and Minnesota has had a very long history of standing up for each other. And I'm recalling when I first moved out here, because, I'm not from here. I grew up on the East Coast. I moved out here after running the Twin Cities Marathon. I fell in love with this beautiful city and a park. I moved my whole life out here. And when I moved here, one of the early things that I did was I attended this local neighborhood association meeting. And they were talking about this peace march across the world. And at first I was annoyed. Like, this is a neighborhood association. Why in the world are we talking about this peace march across the ocean? Why not talk about, the graffiti over on 4th Street or the affordable housing we're trying to put up on Main Street? And while I was initially annoyed, I started to really appreciate the mentality, which is that people believe that they can make a difference. And that is the first ingredient of the recipe for making sure that this kind of thing can't happen again, is you believe that you can make a difference. You speak up. You aren't silenced or deterred through coercion. You're not bullied by the federal government, and you don't let your neighbors get bullied by the federal government. And so I think the first ingredient to make sure that this doesn't happen again is say something. Don't bow your head in despair out of fear that you might be next and you'll attract the evil eye in your direction. No, speak up, or you will be the next city where something like this happens. I think you can give a lot of credit. I know you can give a lot of credit to the 435,000 residents that call Minneapolis home, the many more that come and go, and the people throughout the region that have been standing up to peacefully protest by the tens of thousands, that have been dropping off food and groceries to those that are otherwise terrified to go outside because they don't want their families to get ripped apart. Those that are watching guard over a daycare. I mean, that's an important piece here, because you gotta be able to stand together, and you have to have this piece that's far greater than resistance, which is, again, love. The other piece is we want to be fighting on the battlefield of the law. This is not ICE doing normal ICE stuff. ICE has existed in this country and has been operating in Minneapolis for decades in some form. But you didn't have these roaming gangs of agents marching down the street and indiscriminately picking people up, even those that are American citizens. You can't do that in Minneapolis. You can't do that in America because it is against the Constitution. You can't detain somebody because they look like they're Mexican or they look like they're Somali. You can't do that. You need to have a legal process through which you're holding people accountable. And I also think a big part of the focus here has to be on the how. How they were treating people in the street. Because when you focus on the how, it resonates across partisan lines. Republicans, believe it or not, I like to believe, and I've heard many of them say that they don't like to see a pregnant woman getting dragged through the street. Because they're human beings. They don't like to see a 4-year-old kid get picked up, detained, and traumatized. If you recognize your common humanity, nobody likes to see that. Once you start getting into the policy, some people's eyes glaze over, and then you also create these lines of division. But a big focus on the how and these overarching values that we all hold dear, I think that's critical of importance. And then the final piece is having a comprehensive and coordinated legal strategy that is happening across a number of different jurisdictions throughout the country, and we are indeed doing that.
Mayor, did you have any doubt when it became clear that DHS and ICE were going to set their sights on Minneapolis and try to make it an example? Did you have any doubt that your city would resist, that it would hold the line? Because I was here in the immediate aftermath of the murder of Renee Good, and I saw the show of force, and as a military guy, it terrified me. It terrified me what I thought was about to happen to the city. But then on the way to Powderhorn Park, I passed the lake in the middle of town. This is in the dead of January, sub-zero temperatures, and there were Minneapolitans. I learned that's what you call your fellow city residents. There were Minneapolitans who had cut a hole in the ice of that lake and were jumping in for a swim.
Yeah.
And I realized ICE is not going to win here.
Yeah, you can't mess with Minneapolitans, and we won't let you mess with us. Never did I have a doubt about the willingness of our people in our city to stand up for each other, not even for a heartbeat.
Yeah.
I've seen it, like, again and again. And it's the kind of love that is exhibited not just through words, but with real actions. People are ready. And I have been inspired by the people that have been standing up, those that have been peacefully protesting, the soccer moms that have like these signal chats where they're dropping off food. That's still happening, by the way. And the next phase here is the patroning of some of these small local businesses that have been hit pretty hard over these last couple of months, many of them Latino or Somali owned. We got to now go there. And by the way, if you're watching this and you're wondering what can you do to help, and you live in another part of the country, we got this incredible city. By the way, it's getting warmer right now. It's going to be like 50 or 60 tomorrow. And we have this beautiful city in a park. You got to come check it out and spend your money. And we got to, yeah, that's right. That's right. And we got a big concert tomorrow as well. I think there'll be thousands of people that are outside having a ball, dancing their faces off.
Yep.
And we party, we live large, and we want you to come party with us. So no, I'd never for a second thought that they would do anything other than stand up for each other. Now, there were some very scary moments. There was a period there where there were, I believe it was 1,800 or 2,000 military that were stationed in Alaska that were on the verge of getting deployed to Minneapolis. I'm not even talking about ICE agents. I mean full-on military. We were deeply concerned about the invocation of the Insurrection Act, which is something that you don't mess around with, and was deeply concerning for the safety of our residents. And so, I mean, there's things that happened in this last month that, you know, don't even come to the top of the head, but you're reminded about it. And you're like, holy shit, this actually happened in America. This happened in America. And this should piss everybody off. You know, you can't have a federal government attempting to coerce a local municipality to enact a national agenda based on local rules. You know, you can't try to enact your grand Make America Great Again national agenda, whatever, based on coercion. You can't come in and say, hey, you know what? We will take this occupying force out. We will remove that gun to your head if you simply hand over the voting rolls. You know? That happens in other countries, by the way. It can't happen here. And regardless of your ideological background, you should be pissed, because this is about standing up for the underpinnings of our democracy and the endurance of our republic.
Minneapolis was clearly an attempted demonstration of force. Steve, can you talk about the national lessons that need to be learned here? What the country, what the next city on the list needs to pick up from Minneapolis's win? And sure, ICE left with its tail between its legs. The parallel isn't perfect, but they should have learned that you don't take Moscow in winter, right? But there's another city on the list. There are many more to come. and the lessons from Minneapolis have to be carried to those cities.
Well, I mean, we're about to see this be applied all over the country, and one of the things that really matters here is not every city has a great mayor, but Minneapolis does. And so Jacob Frey, history has put its eyes on you, and you've measured up in a time of testing that the whole country has witnessed. And so if you're out there, you should appreciate that when you go to vote, that your vote matters. And the people that are elected into these jobs have life and death responsibility. And we see this playing out in grotesque fashion over the course of the Trump years. And when you think about the aggression, the abuses of American citizens that have played out in Minneapolis and the demand that it stop, you have to have moral leadership. You have to have leaders who are invested in the idea of service to a concept, and that concept is the oath. It's the Constitution. And across the country, there are warehouses that are being turned into concentration camp facilities, and I think it's a fair use of the word. When you have a 1 million square foot industrial warehouse, some of them with no lighting inside because they were never intended to have human beings in them, that these warehouses are being turned into industrial scale prison sites for some unknown number of immigrants who are at the end of the day deposited there at the end of this rotten supply chain that begins in Minneapolis, that begins in these other cities. This has to be opposed all over the country. And getting on your knees to any of this has not worked out and will not work out well for everybody or anybody who does it. And so the signal lesson from Minneapolis and from the political leadership in the state is defiance against the lawlessness. Is that there have been a lot of instances in history where tyranny has declared its lawfulness as the first sentence in their oppression of people with unjust means. And we have to be cognizant of that. We have to use all lawful means to oppose the maximum abuses of power. And that's the lesson of Minneapolis, that people will not abide this. They will not tolerate it. And it takes an awful lot of guts to go from driving your kids around one day to staying calm when a masked federal thug points a weapon in your face and tells you you can't do something that you're constitutionally permitted to do, to defend your rights, to hold your ground, to work with your neighbors, and to stand up for the right against the wrong. And there should be no ambiguity from leaders in Washington, D.C. and the Democratic Party what the demand of people is all over the country. You know, they want leaders like Joe Nagoon. They want leaders like Jacob Frey. They want people standing up. And that's why we do this second Fighting Democrats series. So good to be with the mayor who has stood up so well and for so long on behalf of so many that will not abide this insanity being done in the name of all the American people. I mean, every American is invested in what's happening in Minneapolis because the federal agents there abusing our fellow citizens are doing it in our name, the name of the American people. So there is no room for neutrality in any space around these issues in America about right and wrong, about what's just and what's not. And so again, you know, the mayor's been an exceptional leader in a time of crisis with the eyes of the whole country on him. You know, grateful that you have somebody in there when this abuse is done in the name of all of us who says no, not on my watch. So the people of Minneapolis are lucky, and everybody should take heed. When you go into a voting booth, make sure your mayor is a good person, good man or a good woman.
Well, thank you, Steve. That means a lot. And again, the credit is really due to the people of this city, because there's no way in hell any of us could have put this together without the kind of resistance and love that they offered. And you brought up a really important point about these constitutional values. And I was thinking as you were talking, traditionally you've got these amendments that are largely held dear by Democrats, and you've got other constitutional amendments that are held dear by Republicans. And this whole operation has kind of flipped a lot of that on its head. The 10th Amendment, the concept of federalism, the reserving of authority not explicitly taken by the federal government for states' rights and localities to make their own decisions about how best to serve their general public. The concern about a federal overarching force intruding on the values of local neighborhoods. These are usually values held by Republicans, right? Don't tread on me. I never thought of Minneapolis as the city of don't tread on me. You don't go around the city with like don't tread on me bumper stickers everywhere. I don't see that. But that's kind of what it's been. And so for all of the Republicans out there who live in a beautiful small town or a great big city, consider how it would feel for you if your values were suddenly stomped on by an over-occupying federal government that did not share the values that you had. Consider what that would feel like, because that's how it's been in Minneapolis. It's not just the 10th Amendment. Of course, it's First Amendment intrusion, but it's even Second Amendment. I never thought of myself as the guy to defend the Second Amendment. I'm not a big Second Amendment guy, But Alex Preddy was a lawful gun owner. And if nothing else, be consistent. Don't be a hypocrite. You shouldn't be for, individual gun owners and gun rights when the gun owner thinks something that you think, but then not for that gun owner when they disagree. Isn't that the whole concept that some of these gun owners, the hardcore gun people have talked about, is like you got to have the ability to own firearms to protect yourself from an insurgent federal government. By the way, I don't agree with a lot of that stuff, but that's the argument that's been made. And if that's the case, then it should at least be objective. There should be a criteria, and you should stand by it.
Mayor, I was talking with your staff before we went on the air, and I'm sure you know this, but your phones are blowing up with people from across the country calling in and saying, teach us, share your lessons, tell us what you did right, tell us what you might have done wrong, so that we can learn for when ICE comes into our communities. How are you capturing the lessons learned, communicating those to other cities who are going to need to learn from them?
Yeah. Well, first, I'm sure in the years to come, there are always a lot of lessons that you learn after a crisis. Sometimes it takes a little bit of digestion to understand what those lessons are. But I'll tell you a few things that are really apparent in the immediacy, some of which we really did. Set the terms of the discussion and the agenda of the argument right from the beginning. Don't lean into stuff that just doesn't make common sense. Lean into the values of having a city that works. And so, for instance, from the very beginning, we talked about this operation, Metro Surge, not being about safety. A lot of this federal administration was trying to cast the whole argument as, well, we're just trying to keep people safe. No, you're not. If you were trying to keep people safe, there were really obvious mechanisms for us to work together to make that happen. We have worked extensively with the ATF and the DEA and the FBI and a number of different federal administrations and the U.S. Attorney's Office and successfully investigated violent criminals, arrested those perpetrators of those crimes, and gotten them off our streets. And with great success, crime, and specifically shootings on the north side, are like at an all-time, at least on record, low. And to the extent this federal administration wants to go after murderers and rapists, we're all in. I've been telling people, hey, in Minneapolis, we're anti-murder and anti-rape, which is like the easiest position I've ever taken in my life. And I say that just to make a point. It's true, and it's kind of tongue-in-cheek at the same time. Obviously, we're against those things. The question I have is, why you got to make it about where you're from? If you're a murderer, I have an issue with you as a mayor because you hurt people in my city that I love. I don't care if you're from Chicago or Minneapolis or, I don't know, Cleveland or Germany or Mexico. No matter where you're from, we're going to come for you because you're a murderer and you're going to get put in jail. Same thing if you're a rapist. Let's have the focus be on actually keeping people safe. And by doing that, you take a really important narrative away from them that this is somehow about safety. This is not about safety. I don't even think this is about immigration. If it was about immigration, you'd go to a place where there were far more undocumented immigrants. This was about creating a narrative, specifically attacking a blue city in a blue state and trying to show chaos. And so don't give them the argument of chaos in your city. Take care of the basics. Make sure you got a city that works. Stand up for common sense and recognize also, this is important for us to hear too, the opposite of Donald Trump extremism is not the opposite extreme. The opposite of Donald Trump extremism is good, thoughtful governance, where you look at facts, you listen to experts, and then you love your city and your country more than your ideology.
I want to send it to Steve to wrap us up, but before I do, one more plug for the Dropkick Murphys concert tomorrow on Nicollet at the site of Alex Preddy's.
You got to say it right. It's Nicollet.
Nicollet. Okay.
It's Nicollet.
Minneapolis and Nicollet.
Yeah. So Dropkick Murphys on Nicollet.
On Nicollet. Steve.
On Nicollet. So I have a question about. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I want you to take us inside the room where you have to sit down with a Republican congressman, a MAGA congressman like Tom Emmer, who knows better. A lot of Democrats, members of Congress would say, Emmer's a good guy. When he was running for Speaker, a lot of Democratic members of Congress were saying, we could do a lot worse than Tom Emmer as Speaker of the House. So here we are, and you look at the totality of everything that's gone on. What distinguishes Minneapolis is a large Somali population that was easy to point a finger at, to villainize, to stigmatize. J.D. Vance was on the record clearly talking about that there was a necessity in his mind to lie about Haitians eating pets and dogs and cats because he was trying to make a larger point that served his anti-immigrant agenda. So because there are Somalis in Minneapolis, the federal government came to wage a sort of war against the people there, to titillate at some level for propaganda, a Fox News audience. When you see people that represent the state in Congress and the other party, your people from the state, who have sided with Trump, have taken the side of the abuser of the liberties of the people in Minneapolis, how do you process that when you're sitting across that person at the table? How do you keep your contempt at bay and keep on the straight and narrow, keep on task, keep on focus, be able to compartmentalize all of that? Just take us inside the room where it happens with some of those folks.
So many of these folks that you talk about are not the same folks that they were 10 years ago. Tom Emmer being one prime example. I have sat across the table from Tom Emmer. We have attended events together. I have had discussions with him that were fruitful and positive a number of years ago. That is not the same person that I've seen these last several years that has this fealty pledge to Trump, that has not, who does not have the guts to tell his own side what they don't want to hear. And I find that deeply disturbing. You need to have the guts to tell your own side what they don't want to hear. It's easy for Democrats to go against Republicans. It's easy for Republicans to go against Democrats because you got a team on your side. But sometimes you also got to say, hang on a second, guys, this doesn't make any sense. And I'll use the example that you talked about with our Somali community here. First, let me acknowledge the truth, which Democrats should be doing. The fraud is very real. Fraud happened. A ton of money was stolen. People took money from families that could have used that money for housing and food. This was important government emergency assistance that went to people that stole it. That's a problem, and we should all acknowledge that. But here's the thing. When you've got a fraudster in America, when you've got someone that breaks the law, you investigate that fraudster, you prosecute that fraudster, you have a court hearing, etc., and then they ultimately go to jail. As an individual, they go to jail as an individual. You don't hold an entire community accountable for the actions of those, you don't hold an entire city accountable. And what I believe happened is that somebody from pretty high up in the Trump administration, I'm speculating about this, by the way, but I think I'm right, said, go to Minneapolis, detain and deport a bunch of Somalis, and there wasn't the proper pushback on that directive, only for them to get here and recognize, well, shit, they're all Americans. They're citizens. They got here on a plane. They came in on Delta, legally. And the vast majority are citizens, and those that aren't citizens largely have some papers, workforce, green card, whatever it may be, or refugee status. And so now they got here, they had this, it was a mess, and they quickly diverted their attention from specifically our Somali communities to our Latino communities. But the message holds true, which is, yeah, occasionally it is comfortable telling your friends and your own side what they don't want to hear, but you got to do it. I've been very disappointed in Tom Emmer, both with his rhetoric around Somalis and also, not to make this about myself, but the DOJ is investigating me for garbage reasons, for really no reason at all, as far as we can tell. And while I can't talk about that, it's supposed to be, this secretive process. I'll tell you, if the federal government that was or will be a Democrat administration goes against Republicans that I don't agree with for garbage reasons, I will stand up for them. I will do that, not because I agree with Republicans on a lot of stuff. Obviously, I don't. I would do it because the importance of our American society is of far greater importance.
Well, perfect place to end it. Well, I'll just say, perfect place to end it. Enjoy the concert, everybody. Mayor Jacob Frey, Ken Harbaugh of the Ken Harbaugh Show, president of the Valor Media Network. Thank you all for joining, and great to highlight fighting Democrat, Mayor Jacob Frey of the great city of Minneapolis.